It was the moment my life changed forever. For me, it was more than just a case. It was the moment I stopped being just a girl from a small town and became the woman the system would try to destroy. My name is Linda Carter. I was 31 when I first led a major investigation without my superior looking over my shoulder. The precinct smelled of old coffee and stale donuts, and I could still hear the distant sirens wailing through the city streets. My senior detectives were out celebrating the chief's retirement at a fancy steakhouse downtown, and I was up here, elbow deep in a high-profile case that had everyone stumped. "File," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. The veteran officer, a man with graying hair and a weary look, paused for a split second too long, just enough to remind me that I wasn't supposed to be here, that I hadn't earned their trust yet, but then he handed it over. The weight of the file was heavier than I remembered, not physically, but in every other way. Time of first report, 9:15 p.m., the dispatcher murmured. She was the only one in the room who looked at me with something other than doubt. Officer Davis, always steady, always watching. The young man on the file, a late 22nd tech entrepreneur, had arrived barely clinging to life. He had been found unconscious in his luxury apartment, massive internal bleeding, suspected poisoning, every second mattered, minutes killed. "Secure the scene," I said aloud, trying to keep my hands steady. I wasn't talking to the team. I was talking to myself, to the ghosts of every case I'd studied, to the voice of my father that no longer existed. Pressure mounted as I made the first call. My gloves were instantly slick with nervous sweat. "Coagulating clamp," I ordered. No hesitation now. My mind split into two halves, one observing, one acting. I could almost hear the silence of my childhood, the long hallways of foster homes, the night I stood screaming outside the precinct door while they told me my parents were already gone. "Where's the detective?" I had screamed, "Where's the damn detective?" "There's no one on duty," the officer had whispered. "We called, but he's out of town." I'd never forgotten that night. I never would. Back in the briefing room, I found the tear in the timeline. Jagged, deep, an alibi that didn't hold up. "Analyze here," I said. "Then we clamp." Officer Davis moved quickly. Her presence grounded me. The victim's vitals were tanking. My fingers moved faster. "His BP is dropping," someone said. "Not again. Not like my parents." "We're not losing him," I whispered through clenched teeth. I don't know how long we were in there, 2 hours, maybe 3. When it was over, I was soaked in sweat, my hands shaking only after the gloves came off. The case was stabilized, but I didn't feel relief, not yet. That came later when Officer Davis touched my shoulder and said, "You've got a mind blessed by God, Detective Carter." I nodded, but the truth was, I didn't care about praise. I only cared that I didn't fail. Later, back in the residence lounge, I sat down to finish my notes, trying to quiet the storm in my chest. That's when Miss Lucille, the old security guard who worked nights, poked her head in. She was holding a paper bag. "I heard you saved that boy," she said, smiling like a proud grandmother. "Brought you some peach pie. Baked it myself. I hadn't tasted something warm in weeks. I hadn't been seen like that in years." I thanked her, but I didn't cry. I never cried. Not then. That came later, too. The next morning, I was called into the chief's office. The same hands that had saved a case only hours before were now folded tightly in my lap as I was told I had violated protocol, that I had no authority to lead the investigation without sign-off, that there would be a formal inquiry. The irony, the head detective I overstepped had been drinking martinis when that man was brought in. None of it mattered. I saved a life, but I broke the rules to do it. And I would pay for that one way or another. The first time I heard his name, it was whispered like a threat. "Ryan Mercer, he's in room 3. Get Detective Carter." I was just finishing my shift when the call came. I remember the way the nurse's voice faltered just enough to let me know this wasn't an ordinary patient, a privileged last name, a panicked father, the kind of situation that comes with complications that have nothing to do with medicine. Ryan was slumped in a wheelchair, pale, sweating, curled over like a boy with a bellyache. But it didn't take me more than 5 seconds to know this was no stomach flu. His pupils were blown, his breathing shallow but erratic, his pulse skipping like a scratched vinyl. "What did you take?" I asked him softly. "Nothing," he groaned, his hand gripping his side. "I swear it just hurts bad." There was no time to argue. His appendix was on the brink of rupture. But his blood work was a minefield. Traces of synthetic cannabinoids. Maybe fentanyl. I recognized the chemical smell in his sweat. I'd done a rotation in addiction medicine. I knew what I was seeing. I should have sent him straight to psych or rehab. But that's not how it works when the last name is Mercer. Before I could even change gloves, Walter Mercer, his father, was on the phone with the chief of surgery. He wasn't asking for anything. He was issuing directives. Ryan would be treated discreetly, immediately, and without press. Only the chief was in D.C. for a conference. That left me. I should have walked away, but I didn't. I scrubbed in, briefed anesthesia, and opened the boy up within 30 minutes. It was textbook at first, until it wasn't. Blood pressure plummeted. His heart rate spiked. The drugs in his system didn't play nice with anesthesia. He started crashing mid-procedure. We stabilized him barely. I sutured the site and ordered full toxicology screens. I wrote it all down, line by line. I wasn't going to be the doctor who looked the other way. When I came to check on him the next morning, Walter Mercer was already there, standing over his son's bed like a man inspecting merchandise. He didn't even glance at me as I reviewed the chart. "How is he?" he asked flatly. "He's recovering," I answered, still reading vitals. "Why does he look like hell?" "Because he's been through hell," I said. Finally, he turned his eyes on me, ice cold and cutting. "We'll need to talk," he said privately. Out in the hallway, his tone sharpened. "You're making notes in his file about drugs." "I documented his condition," I replied. "That wasn't necessary. It was medically relevant. He's not an addict. He tested positive for." "You don't want to go down this path," he warned, voice dropping to a growl. That should have been the moment I shut up, smiled, let it go, but I didn't. "Mr. Mercer," I said, "your son could have died. He needs help, not denial." His eyes narrowed. "You're a surgeon, Dr. Bennett, not a social worker." Then he turned and walked back into the room. 5 days later, Ryan Mercer was discharged. 3 days after that, he was dead. They said it was post-op infection, but I knew better. And the next time someone called my name down that hallway, it wasn't to save a life, it was to take mine apart. I remember the knock on the chief's office door. 3 short taps. The kind that sound like they've been rehearsed. I was sitting across from Dr. Corwin, our acting department head, when 2 men in charcoal suits stepped inside. One flipped open a badge, the other didn't bother. He just looked at me like I was already guilty. "Dr. Caroline Bennett?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "I'm Detective Harrow. This is Assistant DA Rosenthal. We have a few questions regarding the recent Mercer case." I don't remember what I said first. I just remember the cold spreading in my spine like my body already knew this wasn't a conversation. It was a sentence being written behind closed doors. "Ryan Mercer passed away 2 days ago. The autopsy suggests sepsis as the cause of death secondary to post-operative infection." "That's not possible," I said. "He was stable at discharge. There were no signs of infection." And yet, Rosenthal opened a folder. There are discrepancies in the charting. Missing pages. No toxicology screen. No mention of substance abuse. I stared at him. "I wrote those notes myself." "Well, they're not in the record now." I looked at Corwin, who suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. That's when I understood. The cover-up wasn't mine. It was theirs. A few days later, I was suspended. Then came the hearing. Then the formal charges. Negligence, gross misconduct, failure to adhere to post-operative protocol. The media went wild. "Doctor of Death." One headline read. They used the worst photo they could find. My tired eyes. The shadow under my cheekbone. A hint of blood on my collar. I became a story, not a person. And through it all, Elijah was quiet. Too quiet. He didn't touch me at night. He didn't speak unless spoken to. He spent more time texting his mother than looking me in the eye. Then, one evening, as I sat at our kitchen table trying to write a defense statement, I could barely understand. His phone rang. I recognized the name. Judge Henry Bennett, his father. He took the call on the balcony. The door closed, but I heard enough. She's not handling it well. Yes, I'll talk to her about taking the deal. I know what this family needs. When he came back inside, he smiled like nothing had happened. We need to be practical, Caroline, he said. The evidence isn't in your favor, but my father has contacts. If you accept a plea, something like reckless endangerment, they can push for probation. No jail time. I stared at him. You want me to admit guilt for something I didn't do? It's better than prison. It's a lie. It's survival. He meant well. At least that's what I told myself that night. He wasn't cruel, just spineless. When the trial began, I stood alone. My attorney was assigned by the hospital. She looked at me like a project she didn't want. The courtroom was cold, clinical, every seat filled with people ready to dissect my life. And then came Elijah, called to testify for the defense. My husband, my partner, the man who once said my hands were blessed. He stepped up to the stand in a crisp suit, hair neatly combed back, and told the jury that I was exhausted, that I'd been overworked, that I might have rushed, that maybe, just maybe, I'd skipped a step. I wasn't there, he said, but it's possible Caroline made a miscalculation. She was emotional. She's been under a lot of pressure. A collective hush fell over the room, and something inside me cracked, not just because he betrayed me, but because for the first time I saw who he really was. A man who didn't stand beside me. A man who stood beside power. When the judge announced my sentence, 1 year probation, 5 years suspension of license, I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just nodded and walked out of that courtroom knowing one thing. I had lost everything except myself. We didn't speak on the ride home from court. The sentence echoed in my ears like static. 1 year probation, 5 years stripped of my license, 5 years without surgery, without purpose, without the only thing that ever made me feel real. When we got inside the apartment, I went straight to the bedroom. I took off my shoes. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. I heard him moving around in the kitchen, opening drawers, shuffling papers. Then Elijah stepped into the room, holding an envelope. You should start packing, he said softly. I put some money in here. It's not much, but enough for a deposit somewhere else. I didn't move. I filed the papers this morning, he added. Divorce will be quick. My parents already helped draft it. Still, I said nothing. He placed the envelope beside me like it was something fragile. His voice dipped into that patronizing kindness I used to mistake for care. I know it's hard right now, he said. But I talked to someone at a private clinic. Maybe they can take you on, not as a doctor, but maybe administrative or, I don't know, a registrar, a medical aide. My hands remained folded in my lap. He sighed. I'm trying, Caroline. I finally looked up. No, I said. You're washing your hands. He stepped back like I'd slapped him. A week later, I moved out. Hospitals wouldn't take me. Private practices refused to call me back. Even clinics that specialized in low-income care flinched at my name. Caroline Bennett, the doctor who killed a Mercer. I crashed on couches, slept in shelters. Some nights I stayed in the waiting room of the hospital where I used to work, just to feel less invisible. And then the nausea started. It crept in quietly like a whisper I didn't want to hear. The scent of coffee made me gag. My body ached. I slept 12 hours and woke up exhausted. I bought the test with my last $20. 2 pink lines. I sat in the bathroom stall of a dollar store, staring at the result, numb. I was pregnant with Elijah's child. I should have felt dread or panic or something dark and cold to match the rest of my life, but instead, I felt a flicker. A stubborn, impossible flicker of warmth. It was the cruelest timing imaginable. I had no job, no home, no family. But that flicker, it was mine. I didn't tell Elijah. I never planned to. That baby would never carry the weight of his legacy or his cowardice or his father's cold-blooded ambition. This child would be born with my name, my fight, my blood. The pregnancy was hard. I was constantly sick. My body thin and exhausted from months of sleeping on borrowed mattresses and eating dollar menu meals. But every time I thought I couldn't take another step, I would press my hand to my belly and whisper, "We're going to make it, little one. I swear to you, we're going to make it." I found a room to rent in Uptown, a shoebox with peeling paint, and a single mattress on the floor. But it was quiet, and it had a window that faced the street. I took whatever jobs I could, cleaning hallways, passing out flyers in the cold, even scrubbing the floors of a neighborhood pharmacy at night after closing. I kept a jar hidden in the closet. Every tip, every wrinkled bill went inside for vitamins, for baby clothes, for a crib I hadn't bought yet. Some nights I sat cross-legged on that mattress, one hand on my belly, the other holding a medical textbook I couldn't use anymore, and I whispered surgical terms to the child inside me like lullabies. I didn't know it then, but I was preparing for the fight of my life. It happened on a Thursday morning. I was 26 weeks along, still too early, still too fragile, but my body didn't care. The cramps started low, like a whisper, then grew sharp enough to take my breath away. By the time I made it to the free clinic, my vision was blurring. Blood pressure was dropping. Placental abruption. I heard one of them say, their voices coming in and out like static, "Get her to surgery," someone shouted. The world spun. The last thing I remember before the darkness swallowed me was the cold blue ceiling tiles of the ER and a voice, soft but certain, "Save the baby." When I woke up, the lights were dim, and my body felt like a battlefield. I couldn't move. Tubes ran from my arms, machines beeped steadily. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then I turned my head and saw the incubator. He was the size of my hand, my son. Skin like crumpled tissue paper, translucent and red. His head too big for his body, limbs thin as twigs. But his chest rose and fell barely. They told me he weighed 1 pound, 7 ounce, 670 gram. They didn't name him. They didn't ask me to. I named him Benjamin, after my father. The doctors didn't lie to me. They said it straight, Dr. Bennett. The odds are slim. We're doing everything we can. They didn't know I used to be one of them, that I'd read those numbers, that I understood every beep, every warning light, every shift in oxygen levels. Knowledge is a terrible curse when it comes to hope. Every day I sat beside his incubator. I wasn't allowed to touch him at first. Just watch, helpless, his tiny body covered in wires, his mouth taped around a breathing tube, his hands clenched in permanent fists. But on the 4th day, the nurse slipped me a pair of sterile gloves. "Just your finger," she said. I reached inside and let him wrap his whole world around the tip of mine. It was the first time since the trial, since the betrayal, since the fall that I felt anything close to peace. I whispered stories to him, told him how strong he was, how brave. I told him about the stethoscope I'd buy him when he turned 5, about the tree we'd plant together when we finally had a home, about the life we were going to build. Just the two of us. The 6th night, he crashed. Brain bleed. Pulmonary edema. His oxygen levels tanked so fast the alarms didn't even have time to catch up. The neonatologist tried to shield me from the worst of it, but I pushed past her. I want to see him. Inside the NICU, the room was dark except for the glow of monitors. The machines pumped and hissed like ghosts, but I didn't hear them. I only heard silence. He was still alive, technically, but only barely. His heart a flicker, his lungs drowning. I slid a gloved hand into the incubator and touched his cheek. "Hi, baby," I whispered. "It's me. It's Mama. I'm here." His eyelids fluttered once, and then he was gone. The machine screamed. Staff rushed in. They tried everything, but I knew. I'd known the moment the warmth left his skin. I stood there as they worked, frozen, until one of the nurses gently turned me away. "I'm sorry," she said. I nodded because I was too empty to cry. They gave me a small paper envelope afterward. Inside was his hospital bracelet and the knit cap he'd worn in the NICU. I carried it in my coat pocket for weeks, even after I left the hospital, even after the world outside stopped caring, even after I stopped being a doctor, even after I stopped being a mother. For a while, I was just a woman with empty hands and a name no one wanted to say out loud: Caroline Bennett. After Benjamin died, I stopped speaking for a while. Not out loud, just inside. The world became something I walked through like a ghost. The hospital discharged me with a stack of papers, a grief pamphlet, and a whispered, "Take care." No one asked where I was going. No one cared. I returned to my tiny room in Uptown and found my things in the hallway. Rent was overdue. I hadn't paid in weeks. The landlady didn't even leave a note, just locked the door and left my life in plastic bags. I picked up what I could carry and walked. That night, I slept in the waiting area of a 24-hour laundromat. The lights were buzzing, the seats hard plastic. The only warmth I had left was Benjamin's little cap in my coat pocket. By the next week, I was just another face at the shelter. I didn't tell anyone who I was, not because I was ashamed, but because it didn't matter anymore. Surgeon, widow, mother, exile. Those words had no weight out here. What mattered was staying warm, dry, unnoticed. Some people didn't ask questions. There was a man named Charlie who shared half his sandwich with me one afternoon. He said I looked too skinny. I told him I used to be a doctor. He didn't flinch. "I used to be a welder," he said, taking a bite, "before I lost a hand." Funny how fast the world forgets what you were. Eventually, I started doing small jobs. Cleaning alleys behind stores, sweeping snow off sidewalks for businesses that didn't ask too many questions. I kept my head down, kept my mouth shut, but even out there, people got sick. One night, a woman stumbled into the shelter with a swollen leg, red and hot to the touch. She was burning with fever. No one knew what to do. I did. I asked for a clean towel, a razor blade, anything sterile. They looked at me like I was crazy, but one of the older men handed me a pocket knife and a bottle of vodka. I cleaned the blade, said a prayer, and cut into the infection. She screamed. I didn't stop. When the pus drained, I wrapped the leg tight and told her to rest. I stayed up all night, checking her pulse, watching her breathing. In the morning, her fever broke. Word spread after that. They started calling me Doc. I didn't ask for it. I didn't correct them. It was the first time I'd been called that in months and meant it. I still didn't have a home. Still lived night to night, shelter to shelter, but I began to feel something stir again, deep beneath the numbness. I wasn't healed, not even close, but I was still here, still breathing, still useful, and in a world that had tried to forget me, that was a kind of defiance. I never carried a sign, never asked for change on corners, but I did keep a folded piece of paper in my pocket, a sketch I'd drawn of Benjamin's face from memory. Some nights I would sit alone beneath the rusted train tracks, hold that sketch in one hand and his cap in the other, and whisper into the dark, "We're still together, baby. I'm not giving up." And maybe I wouldn't have made it through that winter. But then came the snow, and a sound so soft I thought I imagined it. A cry, not memory, not grief, a real cry in the night. It was almost midnight when I heard it. I was walking back from a church basement downtown where they let us take leftover soup. The snow was coming down in sheets, blinding, and the wind had sharp teeth that bit through every layer of clothing. I pulled my coat tighter, turned down a side street near the old train depot, and stopped. A sound soft, broken, not the wind, not the city, something fragile. I froze. There it was again, a cry, thin, desperate, almost drowned in the storm, not the sound of an animal, not a drunk man sleeping it off. It was younger. I moved toward it instinctively. Boots crunching through the snow, heart pounding. Under the awning of a boarded-up storefront, I found a shape. Small, still. It was a baby. A real baby wrapped in a thin blanket, cheeks raw from the cold, lips turning a soft shade of blue. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. I knelt in the snow, ripped off my gloves, and scooped the child into my arms. He was barely breathing. I didn't think. I ran. I don't even remember which hospital I found, just that the door swung open and I screamed, "He's freezing! He's barely alive! Help!" They took him from me so fast my arms ached afterward from the absence. I sat in the waiting area, soaked in snowmelt, trembling, unaware that people were staring. A nurse approached an hour later. She was kind, young, and cautious. They said, "You found him on the street." I nodded. "Yes." "Do you know who he is? Number? Do you want to be listed as the one who brought him in?" I hesitated, then whispered, "Yes." She gave me a strange look. Not suspicion, not judgment, just curiosity. Maybe even something softer. Something close to recognition. They let me see him the next morning. He was in the NICU, just like Benjamin had been. Smaller though, and yet somehow stronger. His lungs were recovering. His body was responding. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. "He's a fighter," one of them said. I stayed at the hospital for 2 days, sleeping in chairs, sneaking into the chapel at night to light imaginary candles for a boy I didn't know but already couldn't leave behind. When they started asking about foster care, I asked if I could apply. They blinked at me. "Ma'am, are you currently employed? Do you have housing?" "No," I admitted, "but I'm a doctor." Or I was. I want to help. They smiled politely. Told me there were procedures. But something must have stuck because a few days later, a woman from Child Protective Services asked to speak with me. She was older, sharp, the type who could smell a lie before it left her throat. She asked questions, lots of them, and I answered honestly. I told her everything. Not just about that night, but about Benjamin, about the trial, the fall, the streets, the way I still carried my son's cap in my pocket, the way I'd known deep in my bones that this boy on the sidewalk had been sent to me somehow. She didn't speak for a long time afterward. Then finally she said, "You'll have to take classes, get housing, prove stability. It'll be a process." I nodded. "I'll do all of it." She stood. "Then start with this. His name's Noah." Noah. The name felt like sunlight after endless snow. I whispered it to myself as I walked back out into the city, heart fuller than it had been in years. Noah. The apartment wasn't much. Just one room over a laundromat in Little Village, with cracked windows and heat that hissed and groaned like it resented being used. But it had a door that locked, a tiny kitchen. And for the first time in almost a year, I had an address again. That's what I needed to even apply for the foster training classes. Step 1, a door of my own. Step 2 was harder. I took a job as a night shift janitor at St. Vincent's, scrubbing the very floors I used to walk in scrubs, trailing behind surgical carts. Sometimes I saw old colleagues. They didn't recognize me, or maybe they did and just chose to forget. I kept my head down, focused on the mop, on the checklist, on the clock. Every cent I made, I saved. Every moment I wasn't working, I was in the foster care program. Classes in cold buildings with broken coffee machines. Workshops with tired caseworkers and other women who'd lost their children and were trying to claw their way back. We sat in a circle of metal chairs, talked about trauma, routine, safety. I spoke when asked. I listened when I could. And slowly I started to feel like a person again. Not a ghost, not a tragedy, a woman with a name and a purpose. Noah. Every week, I was allowed to visit him at the group home. He would always be waiting near the window when I arrived. Little hands pressed against the glass like he thought it helped me find him faster. He didn't talk much, but when he saw me, his whole face lit up. That was enough. The first time he climbed into my lap and fell asleep, just like that, arms curled under his chest, I cried so quietly, I didn't even feel the tears coming. It was like my body had been waiting for that moment, for warmth, for weight, for the simple, unbearable miracle of being trusted again. 6 months into the program, I finally had enough savings to renew my medical license. It felt like touching a part of myself I thought had died. The man at the licensing board looked at my file, then at me, eyebrows raised. "You are one of the best surgeons in the city." I said nothing. He kept flipping through the papers. "You could have just moved to another state, started over. Why come back?" I met his eyes. "Because I never left." There was a long silence. Then he stamped the form. Approved. Not long after, I got a call from an old nurse I used to mentor. Her sister ran a community clinic on the south side. They needed hands, didn't care about gaps in resumes or scandals that weren't yours to begin with. I started part-time, general care, wound cleaning, vaccines, the basics. But when I slipped on those gloves again, when I heard that first, "Thank you, Doc," something settled in my chest like coming home. And in the middle of it all, amid the night shifts and caseworker visits, the paperwork and prayers, I kept counting the days until the one I didn't have to count anymore. The day I got the letter. "Miss Caroline Bennett, you are hereby approved for permanent foster placement of minor child Noah James Caldwell." I read it 5 times before I believed it. Then I sat on the floor and laughed. Not the laugh of someone who won, but the laugh of someone who survived. That night, I tucked Noah into his new bed, under my roof, under my care, and kissed his forehead. "Welcome home," I whispered. And this time, I meant it. Chicago thawed slowly that year. The last snow clung to the gutters like it was afraid to let go, and the trees outside my window bloomed late. But they bloomed. So did we. Noah settled into school. He liked numbers and hated raisins. He had night terrors sometimes, and he hated loud noises. But he started smiling in his sleep. He called me Mom for the first time on a Tuesday morning while brushing his teeth. I nearly dropped the coffee mug in my hand, and I set it back even though he hadn't asked. One day, as I was picking him up from school, I saw Judge Ellison getting out of a black car near City Hall. He didn't recognize me. Or maybe he did and chose to keep walking. I didn't stop him because I didn't need anything from that world anymore. The past had already lost its grip. And as for Elijah, the last I heard, he was working at a private practice in Miami. Sierra left him a year in, took half his assets, and sold the vacation condo in Aspen. No one in his family talks to him anymore. Word is Judge Bennett cut him out of the will quietly, but I don't check. I don't follow, because some men fade faster than memories when the truth finally burns through. One Sunday afternoon, I took Noah to the park. The same one I used to walk past when I had nowhere to go. He ran toward the swings, bundled in his little jacket, his laughter echoing against the iron fence. An older woman sat down beside me on the bench. She glanced at him, then at me. "He yours?" I smiled. "Yes." She paused. "You look familiar. You used to be somebody, didn't you?" I looked at her, then at Noah. "I still am." We sat in silence after that, watching the light shift through the branches, the kind of quiet that didn't need filling. That night, I found Benjamin's old cap in a drawer I hadn't touched in months. I held it for a long time. Then I folded it gently and placed it next to Noah's drawings on the fridge, not to forget, but to make room. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't surviving. I was living. I was teaching again, volunteering once a week at the medical college, talking to bright-eyed students about compassion and failure, and how a single moment doesn't define a life. One girl asked me, "How did you make it through?" I told her the truth. You don't climb back all at once. You crawl, you bleed, you pray. And one day, you realize the ground doesn't feel so cold anymore. She nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. On the anniversary of Benjamin's birth, I lit a candle in the chapel at St. Vincent's. Not to mourn, but to say thank you. Because even in death, he gave me a second chance. And I wouldn't waste it. As I walked out of the hospital that night, I saw a young woman standing near the entrance. She looked lost, pale, pregnant. Our eyes met. She didn't speak, but I stepped toward her anyway. Are you okay? Her lip trembled. I don't know where to go. I took off my coat, wrapped it around her shoulders. Come on, I said. We'll figure it out. She nodded. And for the second time in my life, I walked into the storm with someone else in my arms. But this time, I wasn't broken. I was ready.